Good morning. If you're a parent, a grandparent, a child giver getting a child off to school this morning, well, we have some special coverage for you today. The findings from a groundbreaking CBC News investigation into what many Canadian school children face every day, but few talk about: physical assault, sexual assaults, hateful harassment, school violence that some children may first experience when they are very young. Now, we understand stories like these can leave parents feeling helpless, so we have some expert advice for you as well on what you can say and what you can do to help. But we're going to begin this morning with new details on a case that brings all of this into sharp relief and may give some insight into just how conflicts between students can escalate to the point of deadly violence. CBC News has been investigating events that led to the killing of a 14-year-old Hamilton, Ontario boy and charges of first-degree murder against two other teens. Witnesses are now describing the moments before Devan Bracci-Selvey was fatally stabbed near his school, and the weeks of obvious tension, they say, went unaddressed. Ellen Morrow has pieced together all of the information for us, and she's with me here live in studio to tell us all about it. What have you learned, Ellen? We've been obviously following this horrific story ever since it happened, but you've been looking more closely into the events that led up to it. What have you learned?
Well, Heather, the minutes leading up to Devan Bracci-Selvey's death have been really unclear. So we went to Hamilton several times over the past week to really try to piece together what happened. And we spoke to a man who was there that day. His name is Sean Wagar, his son, a close friend of Devan Bracci-Selvey. And he says that on the day Selvey was killed, that he was there at the school with Devan's mother doing something they had done repeatedly since the year began, and that was complaining, essentially raising concerns to school officials about bullying. When they leave the school that day after talking to authorities there, Sean Wagar says that Devan pointed out across the street a group that Devan said were his bullies. So Wagar goes over to this group trying to, he says, address the situation, trying to solve it so they could go on and have a good school year. But things actually escalated to the point where Wagar was confronting the 18-year-old suspect in this case, who then sprayed Wagar with bear spray. And the whole thing really deteriorates from that point. Devan runs away from the scene around the corner. He's pursued by a group of kids, and then a few moments later is stabbed in the back, police say, by the 14-year-old suspect. So now we know there was this sort of incident that precipitated this stabbing. Now, we spoke to Sean Wagar at length at his home in Hamilton, and he's really struggling with what happened that day and his role in perhaps escalating the situation. Here's what he had to say.
It's a situation where I'm going to have to live with it. I went to a place to calm it down, and I kind of feel like I was the trigger. They should have done me, stabbed me. I would have took it and left a 14-year-old to live.
Another layer to this tragedy, Heather, when you hear the grief there in Sean Wagar's voice.
I know you've also been trying to get some information from the school board here. Anything that they have told you or what they are doing at this point?
Well, we spoke to the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board in the days following the killing of Devan Bracci-Selvey. At that point, they said that based on what they knew, they didn't think that they had failed him, despite what obviously ended up happening to him. They would not give us an interview for our latest report on this case, but they did send us a statement saying that they are reviewing and investigating their safe schools practices. We did, though, speak to an elementary school teacher in the same board, and she essentially accuses the board of being weak on discipline, and she says that is fueling violence in schools. Here's some of what she had to say.
This is where the high school students are coming from, where they pretty much can do whatever they want, and there's violence pretty much on a daily basis with very little consequences.
Now, CBC News, as you can see there, is concealing that teacher's identity because she fears losing her job for speaking out.
Okay, Ellen, thank you. Some great investigating there as we understand more clearly what led to that very sad incident. Thank you, Ellen Morrow, here in Toronto. Our top story this morning, returning to that, the CBC News investigation that's revealing some very shocking statistics about the realities kids face in school today. It's called School Violence, our series, and it looks at assaults between kids at school. It's the result of months of investigation and surveys of 4,000 students. And among the findings, a third of students say they were physically assaulted. That's slapped, punched, kicked, bitten at least once in elementary or middle school. More than 1 in 4 girls, 26% exactly, say they have experienced unwanted sexual contact at school, such as inappropriate touching, grabbing of their bodies or clothing. Nearly half of students who experienced violence in high school did not report any of the incidents. Vivien Lee is a psychologist and expert in this area, and we're happy to have her on our program today to help us work through some of this. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
You were with us in the summer, and it's nice to see you again on this. Particularly important because, to me, these numbers are pretty startling. What's your reaction when you hear just how pervasive this reality is?
I'm actually quite surprised at how high the number is, considering that we're only talking about elementary and middle school, and not even factoring in high school. And this doesn't even take into account, verbal or kind of the hidden bullying. So those numbers are actually quite concerning to me.
And obviously bear attention. And how do we deal with this? How do we in our homes and families deal with this effectively? And that's why you're here. So tap into your expertise to help us. If you're a parent, if you suspect that there's an issue with school violence and your child is a victim of that, what do you watch for, number one?
So the major thing you want to look for is changes, significant changes. And this is where it's knowing your child well, because everyone will differ. So changes perhaps in behavior, or personality. If your child is usually friendly and outgoing and all of a sudden seems to be withdrawing a lot, doesn't want to leave the house, doesn't want to do much, that's a big change. So you might want to look at what's going on. So if there's changes in behavior, if they're not doing things they normally enjoy, or they just don't seem as interested in things they normally enjoy, like hobbies or going out with friends, that's another big clue. Changes in emotion or difficulties with emotion regulation. So if you notice your child seems very angry a lot now, or very tearful, or very anxious, and they have trouble regulating their emotions, and this is quite different from how they usually are, that can be another sign that maybe something's going on. Cognitive difficulties, so changes in their thinking styles or how they process information. If you notice they have trouble concentrating or focusing on things, that could be a sign that something's going on. And of course, physical changes. So if you notice changes in appetite or sleep difficulties or a lot of fatigue, for example, those are some changes you can be on the lookout for.
Okay, as you say, as a parent, you need to know your child well in order to pinpoint those things. I'm just wondering, those years, the years we're talking about, can be a time of high emotion, can be a time of tumult and volatility in a young person's life. Is it a matter of it's even more exaggerated than normal, or it might be more prolonged, or how do you know when it's really beyond the threshold of normal teen behavior?
You bring up a good point. I mean, older childhood and early adolescence is when we're really learning to control our emotions and regulate them, and of course we have all these hormonal changes. So you will likely notice some emotion regulation difficulties. So there's no clear line on when this might be indicating something more serious, but this is just a way for you to open the conversation with your child.
So open the conversation.
Yes.
This is the point. How do you then, if you think something's amiss here, how do you broach the subject?
Well, it can be very tricky. It can be very embarrassing potentially for the child, or threatening for them. So being able to approach them with something tangible, something you can put your finger on. So rather than starting with something like, I notice something's wrong with you, what's wrong? That's something that might put someone on the defensive or have them shut down. But if you come up with something specific, I've noticed, you're not going out with your friends as much, or you're really avoiding soccer practice, or you seem to have a lot of trouble sleeping. Is something going on? So this is something you can put your finger on that is less likely to have someone shut down or go on the defensive.
I was going to say, you don't want to antagonize, do you, or have them shut down further? And if they do open up and say yes, what then do you do?
Well, as the parent, you probably want to take a deep breath, and because this is probably going to be quite upsetting for you. And I think many of us, our first instinct would be to jump in and want to take care of and solve the problem, protect your child. But we've seen that getting parents involved right away may or may not, depending on the situation, be the best idea. So really sitting down with your child and trying to collaborate together on a plan. what would be helpful? They know the situation much better than anyone else. What do you think would be helpful? What can we do to make this better?
So the child takes the lead a little bit in terms of a strategy initially. The child may want to deal with it, him or herself first.
Yes, and this is also, it gives them some empowerment, it gives them a sense of control, because if they're being victimized or bullied, they may often feel that they have very little power or control. So being able to sit with them and say, okay, well, maybe we want to work on your communication skills, or maybe we want to come up together with a safety plan, with a buddy at school on how to keep safe in between class periods. So having their direct involvement on what they think will be helpful, and then maybe you can help them problem solve or get the skills that are needed to execute this plan.
What if they absolutely do not want your involvement?
So that's a tricky one. First of all, just always keeping the door open. So rather than getting into an argument about it, let them try to handle it on their own and just be there for support if needed. Now, of course, if there is a threat or risk of physical or sexual harm in the near future, you may have to go above and beyond and get school administrators or perhaps the police involved if there is that threat of serious harm. Otherwise, you may want to just help your child, support them, and try to help them problem solve their way through it up to a point. And if it's still continuing or getting worse, you may have to go beyond and speak to another adult in the situation.
So the parent of the other child or the school officials or something like that. I guess maybe even not even just want you to be involved. They may not even want to talk about it. Then how do you even get through that?
It's a tricky one.
Yes.
And of course, as the parent, that can feel quite hurtful or very upsetting. Perhaps there's someone else that they might be more open to, right? So maybe it's a psychologist, maybe it's the guidance counselor, a teacher, a coach on one of their teams, or an older child that they see as a mentor. If they can speak up to someone and work through some of those feelings and maybe get some problem-solving skills, that can be helpful, even if it's not you at this time.
What if you suspect or your child is not being bullied but is in fact the bully?
Well, that's always stressful. I actually wouldn't change my recommendation too much. So if, as the parent, you find out that apparently your child has been bullying this other child at school. So again, rather than going in with potentially generalizations or potential labels or what they might perceive as an accusation, it's probably not going to be helpful to go in and say, I hear you're a bully or I hear you're being mean, because automatically most people are going to go on the defensive. But if you can, put your finger on something specific. So I got a call from, John's mom, and she told me that, that you were pushing John into the locker the last few mornings. Is something going on, right? And this is something that they can put their finger on. They can't really argue against a specific behavior. And then that opens the door without too much judgment on what's going on. Maybe they have their own stuff going on, they're taking it on others. Maybe they have difficulty regulating their own emotions. But this, again, opens the door for that conversation. It's
such a delicate time. As it's clear from all of your answers how tricky it can be, but it seems key in all of these situations. Have a trusting relationship with your child, listen to them, just make it an open, comfortable atmosphere for them in which to reveal what's on their hearts, I guess. Difficult times to navigate as parents, but thank you for your expertise to help us do so. Vivien Lee, psychologist in Toronto, and my guest this morning. Great to have you on the program again. Thank you for coming back. Now, as our series continues, tonight on The National, you'll hear more about the overall survey. 4,000 young people have told us about their experiences with peer-on-peer violence. This series is called School Violence. It's on The National tonight. It's on Marketplace as well tomorrow night, 8 p.m. on CBC Television. And if you have a story or a question about school violence, we welcome them anytime. You can email us at schoolviolence@cbc.ca.